Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and over the last few weeks we've been taking a pretty close look at the upcoming class changes and revamps coming out in the patch 11.05, WoW's 20th anniversary. And they're doing a lot for our classes, but primarily they're focusing on hero specs in particular, because the fantasy and the gameplay of some of them just hasn't quite worked out during the launch of Season 1 of War Within. Playstyles such as the Dark Ranger have a lot of lore and a lot of fantasy behind them, but it doesn't translate into the current version of Hunter. But the PTR version is really enhancing it to weave better into the marksmanship and beast mastery, and visually it really makes you stand out from Sentinel marksmanship hunters or pack leader beast mastery hunters. The same effort is being put into totemic enhancement shamans or spellslinger mages, but also Deathbringer Death Knights, arguably the most popular class hero spec combination in the game so far. I mean, Deathbringer is literally S tier right now in Season 1, and they're only making him even better. So if you haven't leveled a Death Knight in preparation for the 20th anniversary, I think now is the perfect time to start getting one up and running. Today's video, I really wanted to dive into all the Deathbringer changes and the quality of life adjustments they're doing for that hero spec in particular, as well as some of the other smaller changes coming to the class of Death Knight in general. As always, if you guys want to see more War Within deep dives like these in the future, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right into the Deathbringer playstyle. If you haven't picked up a Frost Death Knight or a Death Knight in general for the War Within so far, I think this would be an excellent spec to at least start leveling now, or either plan on leveling in the future, maybe during the 20th anniversary update once we get a fairly sizable XP catch-up increase. Because as part of the 20th year update, they're doing a bunch of different class changes, but also, more importantly, hero spec adjustments, because a lot of the different hero specs in the game, like Dark Ranger Hunter, for example, fantastic fantasy, but it doesn't quite play super well when it comes to dungeons and raids and even PvP, and it doesn't really have this Dark Ranger aesthetic about it, and the stuff they've done so far looks good and plays much better and has a more cohesive synergy with your talents. And they're trying to do the same thing for the class of Death Knight, which I think started out pretty strong. What's weird about the Death Knight though in particular is they're actually further improving the most popular, at least currently, Death Knight hero spec of the Deathbringer, which is a popular pick for Blood Death Knights and Frost Death Knights. It is a fantastic choice. It's very powerful. It has awesome gameplay. It even has good thematic components like Blood Bowl for Blood Death Knights turns blue because it derives its power from the Shadowlands instead of from the Sunland Sanguine blood magic that Death Knights possess. But they did address that the hero spec itself doesn't have a lot of options. You kind of just have one build that fits all profiles. So they really wanted to change up some of the talents to make them a little bit more competitive and to give the Death Knight or Deathbringer a more cohesive gameplay that everybody expects out of this playstyle. So we start off with a slightly differently looking hero spec talent tree. A few talents are here and there, but the actual changes are going to be from the actual details within the abilities. So the first thing we see with the Deathbringer is actually a modification to Exterminate using the talent of Painful Death. Normally this choice right here is a choice node between Painful Death and Swift End, which nobody runs Swift End at all on the live realms. Instead, people just run Painful Death because it makes the ability to Exterminate better. You see, with Exterminate, the way that it functions is as you deal damage to the enemy target, you build up the damage of your Reaper's Mark. And once the Reaper's Mark explodes, either when it reaches full stacks, it allows your next Obliterate or Morrowind to strike at the target with a scythe, dealing single target but also cleave damage. Painful Death would give you 2 of those scythes that you can utilize back to back, and also increase the chance for those scythes to reapply Reaper's Mark back up to the target, which made it obviously a very powerful combination, especially if you could chain multiple of these scythes back to back and multiple reapplications of Deathmark at the target. It was an obvious no-brainer choice that was very popular and a much more powerful option than Swift End, so they basically just took it and baked it directly into your baseline Exterminate. No longer do they have a talent that modifies Exterminate further on the left-hand side, instead it's a talent that actually buffs some of the talents above it, like Wave of Souls and Soul Rupture. So with the new talent, now we have Swift and Painful. If no enemies are struck by Soul Rupture, which is the talent above it, when Reaper's Mark explodes, it deals additional damage to nearby foes. But if it doesn't hit any nearby foes, it instead grants the Death Knight 10% strength for 8 seconds. And the fact that you can chain those Reaper's Mark against a single target with Exterminate and the way that that functions now, it can mean that you can chain a 10% strength buff back to back on your Frost or Blood Death Knight, which overall makes you more effective. Wave of Souls, an AoE based ability. After you apply a Reaper's Mark at the target, it sends out a wave outwards against the target and then back at them, and every time it hits the target, it causes them to take additional damage from Shadow Frost abilities, and the second wave back is always a guaranteed critical strike. That Wave of Souls is going to be 100% more effective on your main target of Reaper's Mark, which makes this talent, which is primarily an AoE cleave talent, slightly more impactful when it comes to pure single target damage. Down in the middle row, we also got a new talent replaced. Initially we had a talent called Blood Fever, now replaced with Wither Away, a much more powerful choice. The original Blood Fever would alter your Frost Fever or your Blood Plague as a Blood Death Knight to have a chance to deal 30% more damage as Shadow Frost, but that damage is not really consequential, and it wasn't really strong on its own as a talent. Now it's replaced with Withered Away, which was originally a choice note against Dark Talents, but now been moved up. A much more powerful talent that increases the rate at which Frost Fever and Blood Plague deal damage, dealing damage 100% faster, and the second sight of Exterminate always applies your main disease back up to the target, which allows your dot damage to be a little bit more impactful and a little bit burstier for Frost Death Knight, offering more damage. But for Blood Death Knight, Blood Plague damage actually leeches the target's health back to you, so it's a way for them to deal damage, but it's also a healing component of their overall playstyle that can be further modified with different talents. So just overall a massive improvement on the talent in particular. Then on the right hand side we have a couple more talent updates like Bind in Darkness, where Rime empowered by Howling Blast deals 30% more damage to its main target. For Frost Death Knight, there are some obvious synergies when it comes to some of your other talents to make a Howling Blast based gameplay even more powerful than before. For Blood Death Knight, this talent is a little different. Instead, it causes your Blood Boil to deal 10% additional damage and now makes the damage Shadow Frost. It also gives that unique blue appearance instead of the original red appearance. On top of it, Shadow Frost damage now allows Reaper's Mark to gain stacks a little bit quicker. Shadow Frost damage directly applies 2 stacks to Reaper's Mark and 4 stacks when those abilities are a critical strike. Defensively, Deathbringer does see a slight downgrade with Rune Carved Blades, which has been kind of the default talent that a lot of people slot in and forget about. They've nerfed it a little bit, which allows the talent now to reduce magic and physical damage by 1.5% per stack instead of 2%. So it's slight reduction there, but they're trying to make the talent of Pact of the Deathbringer a little bit more appealing in the long haul. Besides this, we also got a couple of new choice nodes down in the middle, like Grim Reaper versus Reaper of Souls. Part of the Deathbringer playstyle is this execute-based gameplay that allows you to benefit from talents such as Soul Reaper, for instance. And the talents of Grim Reaper and Reaper of Souls now fully embrace the kind of execute potential. With Green Reaper, Reaper's Mark Initial Strike grants you either 3 charges of Bone Shield as a Blood DK, make it better defensively, or grants you a Killing Machine proc as a Frost Death Knight. Reaper's Mark Explosion also deals up to 30% increased damage based on your target's missing health, which gives the Prime ability even more of this execute potential, which also has a lot of this cleave-based structure behind it. Or you can play around with Reaper of Souls, which modifies your rotation in a wild new way. When you apply Reaper's Mark on the target, the cooldown of Soul Reaper is instantly reset, and your next Soul Reaper costs no runes, and it explodes on the target regardless of their health. Big fan of talents that kind of modify the rules of existing abilities, turning an execute ability that can sometimes be clunky, giving the Soul Reaper the ability to just be applied on a target regardless of the health, makes it much more friendly and much more usable as a base ability. And below that we have another choice node, but more familiar talents that we've seen before. So while Swift End as a talent did get removed instead of being a choice node where Swift and Painful is now, it does come back as a Reaper's Onslaught to a degree. With Reaper's Onslaught, very similar to the original Swift End, it reduces the cooldown of Reaper's Mark by 15 seconds. Baseline, it's a 45-second cooldown, but you can get it down to 30 instead. But the amount of Mararans or Obliterates that are empowered by Exterminate, which add an extra scythe effect, is reduced by 1. You still will get to keep a 30% chance of your scythe to reapply Reaper's Mark back to the target, so at least it's like better than before. But locking it down to a singular Obliterate or a singular Mararan, I don't really know if that's going to be better. This one ends up being a bit of an antithetical talent for Frost Death Knights in particular, just because Soul Reaper right now at 45 seconds lines up really well with your Pillar of Frost, and it's something that can be synergized together. Desyncing it by 15 seconds, I don't think it would be worth it for Frost, though there may be some viability of it for Blood Death Knight, since Blood Death Knight can reduce the amount of damage enemies deal to you by 5%, which could potentially be a more defensive option for them specifically. But now that Reaper's Mark has abilities such as Grim Reaper as well as Reaper of Souls baked into it, there may be some synergy there as well to use the ability more regularly as more of a rotational adjustment than anything. The other talent in that row is a modified version of Dark Talents, which is still a very powerful talent, but now it's something you could really fully invest into. As a Frost Death Knight consuming Killing Machine or Rhyme, or as a Blood Death Knight using Morrowind or Heartstrike, has a 25% chance to grant you 3 stacks of Icy Talents. Icy Talents being the talent over here that actually increases your melee auto attack speed by a set amount, stacking up to 3 times. And this ability can instantly grant you all those stacks. In fact, that actually can give you more stacks that add up to the maximum for 6 seconds. So it can grant you 3 stacks of Icy Talents and increase its maximum stacks by the same amount. So normally you could have 3 stacks, but with this talent you could have up to 6 stacks for 6 seconds. On top of it, with this talent, spending Runing Power abilities counts as Shadow Frost damage, which allows your ability of Reaper's Mark to build up its power and erupt more frequently. And this effect of Shadow Frost damage is active as long as Icy Talents is active, which should be basically all the time. This allows for you to play around with your Runic Power spending abilities more aggressively. I think this one is going to be more consequential for Frost DK rather than Blood DK, but it's still used for either one of the playstyles. As Frost, it creates natural synergy with some of the Runic Power mass spending abilities such as Breathless and Dragosa, which consumes Runic Power directly to deal Shadow or Frost damage, but now becoming Shadow Frost damage that can amplify and cause your Reaper's Mark to erupt rather quickly. And if you can get a couple of lucky reapplications through Exterminate, then that could be a fantastic combo, giving you a massive burst profile every 2 minutes, as long as you get lucky with those reapplications. But altogether, this makes Deathbringer a bit more of an interesting hero spec to play into that actually gives you a couple of options of gameplay. It takes some of the more popular talents and slots them directly. It takes away the competition talents and bakes them into the base gameplay, since that's what everybody plays into, and offers you more options and new options to further enhance your gameplay. Plus, the rotational things with the Grim Reaper and Reaper of Souls offer something interesting and new to the table, as well as Reaper's Onslaught in coordination with someone like Reaper of Souls or even Grim Reaper, but also the new version of Dark Talents that just enhanced what already was a very popular pick for many Death Knights. Besides this though, there are some smaller adjustments which are kind of like a tail end thing for us to discuss here, but they are even further improvements for Blood, as well as a small adjustment for Frost, which is not that bad. Sunlayan playstyle hasn't seen nearly as much play compared to the Deathbringer. It is a fun playstyle, don't get me wrong, but it's just not been as competitive as what Deathbringer can bring. Though they are trying to make Sunlane better, at least for Blood Death Knight, and they're doing some very good stuff with it in terms of its capstone ability. So the primary mechanic of Sunlane is to get procs of a Vampiric Strike. Now there's a way to guarantee Vampiric Strikes, and that is through the Gift of the Sunlayan talent. During Gift of Sunlayan, certain abilities basically turn your Heart Strike into a guaranteed Vamp Strike, and it allows you to use that Vamp Strike as aggressively as possible. Previously, Blood Death Knights had to do that through Vampiric Blood, which was a defensive ability, but one you were encouraged to use aggressively. And as a tank, that always creates a weird situation. When you give a defensive ability an offensive component, you then start to use it like an offensive ability, but that is antithetical to the tank gameplay. Tanks are focused on using their cooldowns in order to spread out damage and in order to survive. But when you force a tank to start using defensive abilities offensively, it creates what players refer to kind of like a degen playstyle, where you're not necessarily playing into your main role of tanking up and fortifying yourself, but rather now you're just being aggressive and attacking everything around you. Giving offensive cooldowns a defensive value is interesting, but giving defensive abilities a more offensive value, where you're encouraged to use them in a different way, doesn't feel nearly as good for tank classes and tank players. So to change the way that these Gifts of Sunlayan works, instead of working off of your Vampiric Blood, which no longer activates a Vamp Strike, they now tie it to Vampiric Weapon, or Dance and Rune Weapon rather. So now during Dance and Rune Weapon, you can use your Vamp Strike to Heart's Content and get full value out of the ability as much as you want. So it's a very common sense change they've done, and I'm very, very happy with this change in particular, just because it's kind of starting to finally make a little bit more sense in terms of how you use the ability, and now allowing you to be able to line up a big weapon of the bat, plus also having your rune weapons using Vamp Strike at the same time should give you a different profile when it comes to doing damage, but also a much better healing profile as well, which I think is going to play around with the ability a lot better than before. And lastly, when it comes to spec changes, we have seen a slight nerf already, specifically for Frost Death Knight. This one is primarily aimed at the powerful playstyle of Obliteration, which down below that we have a talent called Arctic Assault. Consuming Killing Machine fires off a free glacial advance at your target. They're actually reducing the effectiveness of that free glacial advance. Instead of being 100% effectiveness of glacial advance down to 80%. Based on the numbers that we've seen so far, I think Blizzard realized that players are playing this Obliteration into Icy Deaththorn, into Shatter Frost combo, and it's become kind of like the popular playstyle to play in most situations, whether you're looking at raiding content or Mythic Plus content, and I think it's just another attempt of them trying to make the Breath of Citragosa playstyle a little bit more appealing and make the Obliteration build a little bit less of a mandatory go-to option. But the base thing you should know about this whole update is Death Knight is only getting better. Deathbringer as a hero's pick is a very popular pick, and they're only making it even more powerful going forward. So if you haven't leveled the Death Knight, I would start leveling on one now. Or if you want to wait until the 20th anniversary update to take advantage of the WoW anniversary experience bonus, which you can actually get up to 20% in bonus XP, not just 10%. Plus the Warbound rep, then you should definitely do so, because this class is performing really well right now. It is a very popular pick, and it's only getting better going forward, which is fantastic to see. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this update, and I hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community to discuss all of these upcoming changes, or let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.